Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me and taking the time out of your busy schedules and what I hope will be a very interesting and provocative topic today. My name is Karen Harshaw, and I am the CEO and founder of Spark Philanthropy. Spark was founded in 2018 with the ultimate goal to help nonprofits, but also identify viable and sustainable solutions to help meet their growth goals and forever evolving needs. Our goal is to help nonprofits develop the resources, skills, and know-how to build a more effective organization, successful donor relationships, and maximize and diversify their revenue streams. We specialize in fundraising, capacity building, strategic planning, and board development and governance, but we also do leadership coaching as well. I've been in the fundraising world for over 20 years. I have led development teams in various types of organizations from women's health, youth development, the arts, human services, social services, and also I've had the opportunity to work on the other end of the spectrum for a community foundation in which I was responsible for endowment building and grants. I've seen lots, but I haven't seen it all. Before I get started, I just want to take a moment and thank Leadership Council and the 2021 planning team of the Securing the Future Conference for being so courageous and having a conversation about race, especially race when it involves philanthropy and fundraising, because it's not a topic that is typically discussed. The topic speaks volumes to me. I've experienced racism in the field of fundraising as a development director and also as a consultant. I've personally witnessed unfair treatment of people of color in leadership at organizations. Today, I come to you with firsthand experience, but also results and feedback from roundtable discussions that I've had the pleasure of hosting with these leaders of color that are both here locally and also out of our great state of Ohio. This is a huge topic. I know we only will be scratching the surface this morning, but hopefully this will begin a conversation for many to come. My hope is by the end of our time today, you will have a greater awareness of the barriers and disparities that many people of color face in the nonprofit sector. You'll gain insight around solving these challenges and also debunking any myths that are hanging out there that leaders of colors face in fundraising and in philanthropy. We'll also be discussing, what does racism even look like in philanthropy? What can funders really do to help support nonprofits of color and their leaders? What lessons can we take away and learn? And how can nonprofits of color better reflect the voice of the communities they serve? Our time this morning is about 35, 40 minutes. Please know there'll be time at the end of our discussion for any dialogue, questions, comments that will be available to you all at the end of the presentation. So let's get started. Colorblindness will not end racism. Pretending that we don't even see it doesn't help or solve anything. Race is more than a stereotype and prejudice. To beat racism, we need to identify and change social organizational policies that place an advantage on some groups at the expense of others. Racial justice is not just one issue. It's a collection of issues. It's housing, it's healthcare, it's food insecurity, it's education, it's employment, and the list goes on and on and on. Philanthropy needs to look at this in a more holistic sense and not just that one particular area that's happening right now. If you are having a shortage of food, you probably are behind in rent. And if you're having a shortage of food and you're behind in rent, then I'm thinking you might be having an issue with your healthcare. Each one of these things leads to another. COVID has shown us disparities in our education system beyond anyone's imagination, I know beyond mine. Many of the organizations that I work with that address youth development are just truly taken back by all of this. Many children in the city didn't even have basic internet or laptops to participate in remote learning. There are people of color leading efforts to put resources into the hands of these children and to make sure they have access and stay connected so they don't fall behind in the classroom when they're not even in there, right? And they're being denied funding. These leaders of color are being denied funding. Creating racially equitable funding is definitely hard work, no doubt. Data from the Council on Foundations has revealed that the number of people in philanthropy has been decreasing. There's no doubt that we're all passionate about it, but it's decreasing. In 2019, there was a survey that was conducted by the Building Movement Project called the Race to Lead Report. If you have not had a chance to read the Race to Lead report and the survey results, when you grab a few minutes of your time, please take a moment and do so. It's quite interesting. And actually what I'll do is I can put the link in our session in the chat session when we all get back together. This survey was done on 5,000 nonprofits from all over the country. People answered questions about their experiences of race and leadership in the nonprofit sector. Of those 5,000 nonprofits that were being surveyed, 59% of the respondents were white and 41% were people of color. According to the Race to Lead report, on average, leaders of color have smaller budgets to work with and are more likely to report they lack access to financial support from a variety of funding sources than white leaders. Those that were asked in the survey revealed information such as not a lot or a lack of diversity within their organizations. They dispelled things around and talked about, and the results came out about their overall organizational budgets. And these are ones in which were led by people of color, of area of concerns. They talked about the gap in racial leadership. So if they weren't in a leadership position within their organization, they talked about the huge gap in racial leadership, not giving proper recognition to the people of color that are doing incredible work. And they addressed their overall experiences. Additional highlights from the survey that were also revealed was that 51% of leaders of color lack access to foundations versus 41% of white leaders. 63% of leaders of color reported they lack access to individual donors compared to 49% of white leaders. 72% of leaders of color had board members who did not raise money compared to the 64% of white leaders. And 79% of people of color said they need help in fundraising. As a result of and there were a lot more statistics that came out of this. This was the key ones in which they were bringing out and bolding and bringing to the surface. But they also offer to as a result, some recommendations from the survey participants. Feedback, right? And the feedback and the recommendations from the survey participants basically said, we need to pay attention to the experiences of people of color. We need to make sure organizational policies reflect the organization's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's also suggested that funders needed to change their own policy to ensure nonprofits led by people of color get the resources they need to thrive. So how can funders help to support leaders of color and help their nonprofits thrive? Well, for one, feedback came back that they can set racial equality goals that are focused on making organizations' leadership reflect the racial demographics of the population being served. And the second thing, which was huge, was be transparent and upfront about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I love this photo. This is one of my favorite photos. You know, in this industry, we all have one thing in common, whether we are a philanthropist or we're a fundraiser. The one thing we have in common are people. All of us who are here today are in the business and the mission of people. As we all know, relationships are the essence of fundraising. Without them, I don't even know how we would even get from point A to point B. We also know that philanthropy thrives on relationships. It has been ingrained in us that people give to people. We know our work revolves around the need to cultivate a strong, genuine, caring connection when it comes to relationships, whether it's relationships with each other, whether it's relationships between the funder and the organization, or even the organization and its donors, its volunteers. We also know if we want to get to know one another, we got to go deep. And if we go deep, we have to get on a personal level to develop a meaningful connection. Trust is relational, and trust takes time. But the thing about trust is, in a snap of a finger, it can be gone just like that. When it comes to relationship building, leaders of color have shared and described feelings and the feeling of being isolated, navigating difficult, racially fraught power dynamics with grant makers, enduring insults to their dignity, and scrutiny. We need to help grantees that don't have the relationships and may not have the affluent members of the board. Getting to know the influencers and funders is purely a luxury. It really is. Many leaders of color have been excluded from these circles. And as the rich continue to get richer, those that need funding are not getting funded. They have less fiscal and staff resources, and it makes things so hard to do what they care about most. So why are people of color having a tough time at building relationships with funders and getting funded? Well, I can't help but not look at the word trust and acceptance, building that culture. How do people of color work towards building a culture of trust and avoid stereotypes with funders? Lots of organizations are talking about racial equity, but they're not integrating it into their own work or changing how they even operate. There's a certain bias that comes with seeing a person of color as the leader of the organization, especially an African American male. The whole organization must work hard to overcome those biases. Trust building, like all important elements of a good relationship, takes time. We just said that, right? But there must be a conscious and deliberate effort by philanthropists to connect more deeply with leaders of color and the communities of color being served. What does that even mean? It means thinking about how your board looks. It's thinking about looking beyond the application and going into the organization and saying, hey, so tell me what's not on this application that you want to tell me. Tell me, talk to me. There must be a culture of trust rooted in humility and a much deeper learning. Trust should demonstrate listening and learning to people of color. Work with leaders of color so engagement is constantly happening. Conversations are being had. It's not a one and done, but it is continuation of conversation after conversation. And more than anything, it's remaining open and transparent. So what does racism look like in philanthropy? In my discussions with these wonderful people that are leading the charge, trying to solve some of our biggest tackles, from healthcare to education to seniors to young girls. And I asked them, I said, what does this look like? I hear you guys say, I hear it said all the time, oh, it's racist, oh, it's racist, oh, it's racist. But what is it that it looks like? Explain to me what that is. And I have an idea, but I wanted to make sure I captured what they said. And what they said was, it looks like not getting the grant. Because if you're an agency of color, it may not be the reason why you didn't get the grant, but if you don't have the access and you don't have the connection to the large funders, it looks like racism. And it makes leaders of color feel like it's racism. Not getting callbacks when they're putting phone calls into funders, not even seeing people of color in decision-making in these foundations. They said all of that feels like racism. And they even went on and said, it starts with funders needing to diversify their boards. Philanthropy has a tendency of being attracted to organizations doing very high level evaluations. However, you need the unrestricted assets to do that. The study from the Race to Lead survey also showed that organizations that are led by people of color have unrestricted net assets that are 76% smaller than white-led organizations. I'll say that again. Organizations that are led by people of color have unrestricted net assets that are 76% smaller than white-led organizations. And that is a disparity. If funders granted dollars to organizations with unrestricted assets, you can do things such as staff training. They can hire someone to do evaluations, marketing. But most organizations led by people of color tend to have most of their funding, in some cases, come from government funding. And we all know with government funding, it doesn't allow you to take risk. My ask to the funders that are listening this morning on this call, in this session, I ask funders that when people of color are asking for support for general operation, that you might consider. Because that will help even out the playing field to give these organizations that opportunity to do those things that government funding doesn't always allow, even program funding. One organization I tell you I work with gets over 70% of their funding from government funding. And the question is, how do you do it? My advice again to funders is to look at the work being done by these leaders of color and ask these nonprofits what they need, not what you think they need. When I worked at a community foundation a couple years back, we had awarded funds to a nonprofit led by an African-American male And that organization also served people of color in the area of food insecurities. And when we awarded those funds to that nonprofit, it was a very deep conversation, because when we got the application, and then myself and two others went on a site visit, it was brought to our attention that they needed support in the area of operating. So what we did is we changed it up. And when we granted them this fantastic grant, we said we wanted half of it to continue to go to programming and the other half of it to be used for operation. And to us, in that foundation, that is what innovation looked like to us. It was innovative, and you don't find that often. In my work as a consultant, every day I'm meeting with or working with organizations that are doing innovative work, that are led by people of color. They might not be those big powerhouse organizations that have a program team with evaluations that can spit out data just like that, but they are innovative. It truly goes back to funders looking deeper inside at communities that need to be funded, going into the communities, needing to see what they do and how they do it. In order for change to take place, we got to start listening. It goes back to listening. I love this book. I'm sure many of you have read Edgar Villanova, The Decolonizing Wealth. He has an entire section in his book that really speaks to the importance of listening and how listening is key to leadership. I just love this book. I've read it twice already. But he references not just any kind of listening. He referenced in his book 4 types of listening, and one in which funders need to strive for 100% of the time. The first one he mentions is downloading. That's when we hear things that confirm what we already know. Not the best form of listening, right? Because you kind of, at the same time, you're pretty much writing your own narrative. The next is factual listening. This is when we filter what we hear in search of new data and evidence. The third one is generative listening. And that is when we enter into what he calls a meditative flow state. And we are able to connect to the highest future possibilities that can emerge. And then there's empathetic listening. This is where he encourages funders to be 100% of the time. Empathetic listening puts us in the shoes of the person speaking, connecting and feeling what that person feels, giving a glimpse of what it's like to be someone else and see the world through their lens. It also involves holding back our own conclusions, our own opinions, our own judgments, and replacing advice with openness and connection. And I know this is something that all of us, both funder and organization, that sometimes this can be very challenging to do. But again, it goes back to being aware to the communities that we're serving. I remember when I was at an organization and head of development, and it was a social service organization. And every year they would do what was called a poverty walk. And many of you might have done this and probably know of this wonderful organization that does wonderful, incredible work I'm speaking of. I did the poverty walk. And the poverty walk was an opportunity for 3 days to walk in the shoes of folks that were from tough neighborhoods and even homeless. And I recall one of the 2 nights There was one night particularly, I was scared to death, and we slept under a bridge. And in that, I didn't sleep a wink, but during that time, we listened to stories, met people from all walks of life. And as a development officer, putting on my development officer hat at that time, it allowed me to share stories I heard with my donors and even with the funders. I can't imagine if I was actually a funder and had the opportunity to join the walk. And this was my firsthand experience of why the work being done at this organization was so crucial and so critical. Listening is essential for leadership. Listening to the people very carefully, very thoughtfully, every day is essential. I pay a lot of attention to the dynamics of the organization and its culture and how people interact with each other through personal relationships. Many organizations I work with that are led by people of color have shared they feel pinned into a model, and that funders should be willing to have conversations with them and the communities that they are serving to gain that understanding, that perspective, understand the results and the impact and the work that's being done. For philanthropy to advance and equity in communities of color, funders need to understand the demographics of the people being served and the communities being impacted. That data alone should be used to help drive decision-making. Additionally, funders should be transparent with grant seekers by expressing to them how they are using that demographic data that's being collected by them. Because a lot of times they don't even understand what it's for. Second, helping to build their capacity for collecting and reporting this information by funding operations to support technology, databases, and staff time committed to this effort. Providing additional support to nonprofits led by diverse teams that are inclusive of the community that they're serving in the decision-making roles. Imagine. And funding diversity, equity, inclusion, skill building, and efforts to shift culture in support of recruiting, hiring, retaining, and promoting leaders of color. When I say we need to fill the funding gap, I'm talking about 4 things. The first one is taking a risk on some new grantees. Foster more and have conversations with people of color that are leading philanthropic organizations. It has been my experience when I worked at that community foundation that the best work really was happening within the walls of these organizations that we would go and visit, and not necessarily what was written on that paper or in those applications. The second thing was to shift the foundation's transactional way of doing business and making it more relational. Getting to know these leaders of color that are doing this amazing work. There are so many nonprofits doing great work that are not applying, or maybe they even, maybe they have and we just need to reach them. Go out and find those nonprofits that are not on your radar. I'm raising my hand because I know who they are and they're doing great work and they're really making a difference and they've got impact. Which leads to the third point is fund smaller community-based organizations led by local leaders, people of color that develop specific customized solutions right inside their communities. And last is invest in capacity building. One of the most important yet overlooked ways to engage a community is by having them identify their most urgent needs. Well-intentioned philanthropists often enter with preset ideas about what they will support and look for groups doing the work, but community members are the experts on their neighborhood challenges and opportunities. I encourage you to engage in those conversations. So let's switch gears for a minute and let's kind of start working towards dispelling myths, because there's a lot of myths. And it's so funny because when I was talking to this roundtable group of leaders of color, and I've heard some myths, but I wanted to make sure I captured what they have heard and not just what I've heard. Myths, or the story we like to tell ourselves, is how I put it. Myths cause damage. And there's 5 that I jotted down that I want to make sure that we dispel, and even using, I am taking their voices and channeling it out through myself to say, right now we need to dispel these myths. The first one is people of color lack the skill, knowledge, and shared language to lead a nonprofit. That cannot be furthest from the truth. We need to get completely beyond a mindset that implies that. These folks are doing incredible work. They, in most cases, have lived experience. And with that lived experience, they have the skill, they have the knowledge of how to succeed in that nonprofit and how to help others they're serving succeed. The second one was only people of color with a certain background can thrive. And that one was tough. I even had to ask, I said, what does that even mean? They said, well, if you come from a privileged background, then we hear that then you can succeed. And that's not the case. Rather than question how working environments have been normalized to the point that only those with a certain background can thrive, cannot be further from the truth. The third point talks about people of color leading nonprofit organizations lack research and proven effectiveness. That's false. Many of these nonprofits are being underinvested. And funders that invest in organizations led by people of color should realize that if the research is lacking, it's occurring because they aren't able to secure the operational dollars to help them. The fourth one talks about leaders of color only showing up during a crisis. That's false. These leaders have been working on the ground every day. Funders should want to support emerging leaders who are mostly rooted in their communities, and these folks are. Funders should, these leaders have developed customizable solutions to problems inside their communities. They are making a difference and creating impact. I encourage philanthropy to not be in the moment and just focus on the issue of the moment. And the issue of the moment right now is racial justice. But what happens? Let's just be honest. What happens when this starts to die down? Because when it starts to die down a bit, problems with education is still going to be an issue. Hunger is still going to be an issue. Homelessness will still be an issue. Healthcare will still be an issue. Mental wellness will continue to be an issue and on the rise. And the continuation of funding will continue to go on. And that is where leaders of color could use the support. The last myth that one of my clients shared with me was that they heard that organizations, I guess from a funder, that organizations of color don't apply. And that's false. There are so many organizations of color doing amazing work inside of their communities. And although they may fear applying to institutions and believing that they are just not ready, they're still applying. But it goes back to what we discussed a couple slides ago. What they lack is the relationships. What they lack is the trust and the type of funding needed to get the job done. So I'm putting on my funder hat as when I was in the community foundation. And my question is, how do we create a space for relationship building, trust, and show support to leaders of color? This is a huge opportunity for funders to take a hard look at their policies, and if they haven't already, start leveling the playing field towards an equitable future. Let's trust that. Let's trust there that the word again, and that's that word. It's trust, right? And invest in emerging leaders of color with new, innovative ideas. These leaders and organizations are not just showing up in the moment of crisis, they show up every single day. Empowered representation, love that word. I'm currently working with the FQHC. It's for those that don't know, it's Federally Qualified Health Center. Their funding is dependent on 51% of their board being patients of their health center. And that's the people being served. Think about, to my funders that are listening today, think about how your board can be reflective of your community. Transformational change will require having challenges and challenging conversation. This requires funders having to practice better listening empathetically. Treating your grantees of color as partners will help empower them to do their best work. Part of creating that partnership involves establishing shared goals. For funders, this does not mean ensuring that your grantees sign onto all your goals, but instead listening more to the goals of your grantees and figuring out how best to support them. My next, number 6, is start a social justice committee. There are many organizations around, many foundations around that have social justice committee. I'm on one. Number 7, diversify your team so that it reflects the broader community that you serve. And last but not least is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and including that in your mission statement. In closing, before we get to the questions and comments and discussion, to my leaders of color that are listening today and the ones that I had an opportunity to sit down and listen to and speak with, this is the time to push and push hard and not give up. Reform is needed by funders, and the time is now. My funders, who are incredible and continue to fund important initiatives, take a look at these other nonprofits that are led by these leaders of color, that are deeply rooted in the community. And ask yourself, what if money connected us rather than divided us? Give voice to the community. Share those stories. And let's figure out how we can work together. Thank you all very much. I appreciate your time. This has been one of the most healing moments. And I thank you, and I look forward to your questions. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this morning. I want to take a moment and answer a couple of questions that I saw pop up in the chat. Let's see. Forgive me for being a little slow here, but I'm trying to go back and make sure I answer some of the questions. So, someone did mention, does Cincinnati have a Black Giving Circle? And the answer is yes. It's through the Greater Cincinnati Foundation, and actually, I'm a part of that giving circle. I donate to it. I've been donating to it over the past couple years, and it is a. For those that don't know about it, again, you can look at it on the Greater Cincinnati Foundation's website. But it is a fund that is an exceptional fund, and basically, what we do is we fund Black led nonprofits, people of color as well, nonprofits, and the work that they do within their community. So we just gave out 6, I believe, a couple weeks ago to some exceptional nonprofits led by people of color that are doing amazing work. And I believe there might be a list now on their website for anyone that's interested in taking a look who those funds were awarded to. Another question that came up in the chat, and I'm kind of have to go back through here, is a really great question, and one that's pretty hard to answer, but I'm going to do my best to give you that answer. So the question is, what can people of color who are leading nonprofits do to gain the attention of foundations and funders? And, there's no doubt that racial disparities in funding can cripple impact. I think we talked about that a lot, even during our last 40-some minutes together. And until foundations start taking kind of a deliberate step to cultivate nonprofits led by people of color, meaning in the area of ideas, in the area of trainings and even funding, and start accepting those meetings, there really isn't, I hate to say it, not much more we can do. What I will say that we should be doing is continuing to have these conversations like we're having this morning. The one that started with Vanessa, she touched on it a bit, and then of course today, and I'm sure there's some others throughout your morning. But the more that we keep these conversations alive, the more I feel that foundations and funders are going to be able to make that change and start turning the corner. The more we can share our story, share the impact, talk about the impact that's taking place, talk about the strategies and the ideas that you all have in place. The more that conversation starts bubbling up to the surface, I do feel that these changes will start being made. Let's see here. We had some comments around, I'm working my way in, so forgive me. Let's see. Where did it go? I just saw it a minute ago, so forgive me, you all. Alyssa, absolutely, listening is essential for leadership. I think, if you haven't read the survey that I was sharing with you all earlier in the presentation, it's one of my favorites, and it's one that I feel it's a quick read, but it's so insightful. It was actually done in 2019. And that survey, again, 5,000 nonprofits were interviewed. 51% were nonprofits led by white institutions, and the 49% led by Black institutions. And, I just kind of grabbed some of the high points that came from that, but there's such a deeper dive, and it's definitely worth the reading if anyone is interested in there. But one of the big things that did come out in the narrative towards the end of that, during the end of the survey, was a huge conversation about listening and about trust and how much time it takes to build that relationship. And everyone knows that we're in the business of fundraising and philanthropy we live on and live off of relationships. Relationships are the key to our work. And, the more that the funders can kind of drop those barriers and really start submerging themselves into culture and understanding exactly where people of color are coming from and what they're doing and the different types of impact, because they are making changes. They might not be creating these huge impacts that some of the major organizations are doing, but they are making impact. Things are happening, changes are being made. I'm seeing them as a consultant, and they really are doing remarkable things. I have to give praise and shout out to even the folks with the Securing the Future conference. The fact that this group of leaders took basically our names off of these applications to submit for today's conference, it dispelled anything as far as knowing who we are and where we're coming from, and really focused in on what was written down on paper. And think about that. Like, think if we were to take the names off of these grant applications and allow the work that's being done to speak for itself. And that is some of the, some of the key takeaways that I'm hoping as we continue to grow, and we continue to grow as a community, as a city here in Cincinnati, that those types of changes will start taking a place and be effective. One of the questions we had was, Patty asked, what are your thoughts about a more established and funded agency partnering with a minority-led agency to help open doors, build relationships with the funder? It's always great. I'm again big on relationships. I'm always, trying to figure out who knows who, right? I know before sometimes, even when I was in the fundraising field, I used to call some colleagues and say, hey, do you know so-and-so at this place or that place? And they were like, yeah. And they would give me a little bit of background. Sometimes would even help make the introduction. And that goes a long way. The more that we can do more of that for each other, I feel the better things will start getting. But again, keep in mind, we're trying to figure out as people of color of how to break that barrier. Why do we need someone else to make the introduction? Why can't someone just pick up that phone or pay attention to us for one time? And so, yes, it can happen that way. I think it would be great, but also keep in mind, they want their own work to speak for themselves. And I don't think I see any other questions. Yes, thank you. Thank you all. I mean, this is it's such a big topic. Of course, we can only touch on maybe this much, but my big question or my big statement is, again, I think I said it in the presentation, what if money connected us versus money divided us? And that's the part where I think is so huge, and that we see this. I have a question here, is buried above. What can those of us who are not funders do to advance this mission? Keep talking about it. Keep having opportunities in which these conversations continue to bubble up to the surface. Look at your board. Make sure your board is reflective of your community, both on the nonprofit, non-funder end and on the funder end. On the nonprofit end, get to know one another, get to think about ways in which, some of these grants out here and even funding opportunities involve collaborations. What an opportunity to collaborate with someone else and to kind of help bring them into this, into a joint partnership and build that relationship. I think that's always huge. So thank you, Patty, for that question. And Andrea, let's see if there's anything else. Yeah, the biggest thing, I've had the pleasure of working with so many different types of organizations, and majority of my clients, I will say, are people of color that are doing some amazing things. And I have to admit myself, even I don't know half of the nonprofits that are here in Cincinnati that are led by people of color doing great work, and they're just coming out of the woodwork, and they've been around for years. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've never heard of you. And I want to use this platform to start lifting them up. Start giving them that voice, start giving them a seat at the table because they belong. They belong like any of us do. They are making impact. They are changing the outcomes. They're changing the trajectory of how people navigate and how they're navigating. 9 times out of 10, they're actually have been in that position before. And so to me, those are your experts. Those are the people that you want around the table. Those are the people that you want to engage in. And so if anyone wants to say, hey, Karen, who are these folks? I'm happy to provide that list. I say, introduce yourselves. Let's connect. Let's do this together because we're all in this together. See if there's anything else. Yes, just thank you all for the wonderful comments. This is this was a, as I shared earlier, this was a very healing process. It's a conversation that you're kind of sometimes uneasy to have, but at the same time, we need to have it. And until we acknowledge that there is an issue or a problem, I don't know how we would even begin to solve it. So the fact that you all have shown up here this morning, that you all have been engaged in the conversation, willing to listen, willing to be here, I thank you all. And if there's no others, just thank you all for attending today. My contact information, I believe, is within this portal somewhere, so don't hesitate to reach out.